meaning like I had no idea how to build a business. I'm like, I'm going to build $1 million business in 6 months. And it's like a bridge, like a connection point to be like, okay, Grant Cardone. Well, Grant Cardone is a famous business person, but he's also famous. If somebody's best friends with everybody, they have a misunderstanding of who they are.
Hey everyone, you're most welcome to this new episode of the Racks to Riches. And here we have an amazing guest and successful entrepreneur, speaker, and founder of guestio.com, who has been interviewing the top entrepreneurs of the entrepreneurship category. So, dear guest, you are most welcome on the show because the more I would try telling to the people, the less it would be. So, dear guest, you're most welcome on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. I appreciate you. Thanks for inviting me to come on and being persistent until we were able to make it happen.
Right, right, perfect. So, Travis, actually, let me just share with the audience that the topic that we are covering over here is about how he has built his network with the top entrepreneurs and how he has built his network of business around that, right? So, rather like here comes my question is like, how does it seem for an entrepreneur to go from rags to riches?
How does what? Sorry, say that part again.
Okay, it was like, how does it look like to go from rag to riches from an entrepreneur who's trying to meet the ends?
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, first off, it's just the commitment. It's the commitment to make it happen because the going from rags to riches thing isn't an easy path. It's much easier to go from rags to nicer rags. you know, it's
Right.
easier to make kind of these like incremental changes that lead to perhaps some growth or maybe a little bit more comfort or something like that. But when you're making massive leaps and bounds, it's just going to take time. It's never going to be overnight. And if it is overnight, you're likely going to lose everything, just how it goes. Whether you win the lottery or you get lucky on your first business and you don't run into a bunch of obstacles and it takes off like a rocket. There's too many stories, so many stories of people who've made a ton of money, but they did it in such a short period of time, didn't learn enough lessons, and then they lost all the money. And then they had to start over again. Now it was easier for them to go get the money again, but now they had the experience of losing all the money the first time. So now the second time they make it, they're going to actually be able to keep it. So it's a journey and it's a process. And so if you want to really go from like, hey, I have nothing and I want to have a lot in life and I want to be rich and I want to have a lot of money, first of all, that's a good thing. It's not a bad thing to want to be rich. But you're going to need to make the commitment to, because just going to be a long process. You don't know what you don't know, and there's a lot to know and to figure out before you can make it happen. So first, it starts with a commitment. Next, I would say it is completely dependent on the environment that you put yourself in. That's why doing podcasts like this is a really great thing to do, because it allows you to be able to connect with people and ask good questions and get almost like mentored, quote unquote, by people who are a lot further down the road from you, and you can do it for free just because you have a podcast. It's a really great idea. And then beyond the network and the environment that you create for yourself, right? Environment would be like, I would define environment as like the network you have, the people that you hang around with, the inputs that you allow into your life, right? Are you constantly watching negative news, negative headlines, watching things that are detrimental for your productivity? Or are you continually putting good inputs into your life? Are you listening to, thoughtful and productive people who are making an impact on the world and listening to their advice and implementing that more than you're just watching, entertainment television or some of these other ways that people spend their time, or playing video games, or you name it? Are you controlling the inputs in your life enough to where you have the ability to control the output in your life? So, and then your environment would also be your network, the people that you hang around with, people that you connect with, people you have conversations with. Your environment would be the place that you work, the places you go to work out, the friends you hang around with. Like, all of those things are your environment. And so if a lot of people would agree that your environment is what shapes you, but not a lot of people agree that you're the one that has the ability to shape your environment.
Right.
So if your environment is not conducive to you becoming a better version of yourself, then it's up to you to decide to change your environment enough so that your environment can produce a better version of you. So commitment, and then environment. And then the last thing I would say is skill, competency, skill set or knowledge. You have to you're going to have to get good at something. If you want to make a lot of money, you got to get good at something. I would suggest skills like sales or marketing and things like that if you want to make a lot of money, because you know if it's a much shorter path to get good at those things, and you can make a lot of money doing them without doing all the other things. Is kind of the thing I like about sales and marketing. It's like if you
Right.
get really good at product or creating offers or whatever, it's like that's obviously going to make you a ton of money as an entrepreneur, but that assumes that you have a lot of these other things in place, right? Like when you turn from salesperson to entrepreneur, it's like now you have to worry about payroll and HR and taxes and like all these other things that you don't have to worry about when you're just a 9 to 5 salesperson. But you can make a
Right.
good amount of money just being a salesperson and investing your money wisely and living beneath your means. You know what I'm saying? So, but you're going to have to learn a skill, regardless of what that skill is. Learn how to run Facebook ads, learn how to sell, learn how to market, learn how to build good product, learn how to write code, learn how to develop software. Like you have to learn a skill that's monetizable, and you have to get good at that skill, and that craft, that competency has to increase. So yeah, there's a few of the steps along the way.
All right. All right. So this is something what I really feel that when it is coming from an expert just like you who has been through the journey and sharing the experience, it's absolutely gonna be executable over here, right? So let's say, as you mentioned over here, that building the communication skills, sales skills, and marketing skills, right? So in the starting, a lot of people try doing a lot of things and they get stuck in the middle. So how do they get out of that stuck zone to understanding that what actually works for them?
Self-awareness probably would be the answer. It's going to be different for everybody. I don't think it's like a blanket statement that I can answer that with. But I think a lot of it comes down to self-awareness and clarity. Sometimes if you're feeling that stuck or that arduous or that painful during a process, then maybe it's not a good fit for you. Maybe you haven't really taken a look at what you want. Maybe you're doing it for the wrong reasons. Maybe you don't have a deep enough why and understanding of like what you're doing this for. You can withstand a lot more pain if you have a deep understanding of why you're doing the pain, if you're why you're going through the pain.
All right.
Um, but I would say the self-awareness piece is important, man, because you have to have enough self-awareness to understand it. Is this me just like being a whiner and a complainer, and it's just part of the process to go through hard work, have difficult days, and feel pain? Because that is true. It's always going to be part of the process. The question is the end result that you're shooting for worth the pain that you're putting yourself through? And if the answer to that is no, then you might consider just shifting your path a little bit. And that's what I recommend for a lot, especially if you're like young people, like people in teens and 20s. I mean, that's really what you should be doing. It's just like trying and testing and changing and pivoting and like looking for the thing that is going to allow you to put your head down and work, and then work and work and work and work and work. And then when you go to sleep at night, you forgot that you worked all day because it's enjoyable. And that
Right.
doesn't mean that every part of work is always going to be fun. That's, to me, that's a pipe dream. It's impossible. It's not going to happen. There's always going to be things that suck about anything that you decide to do. The question is like, is the end result worth the suck? You know what I'm saying? So a lot of that comes down to self-awareness, and that's going to be different for every person.
All right. Right. So here that the point that you mentioned about that you should have the self-awareness, right? But again, there comes a question like when people start doubting themselves when the results are not in their favor, right? So while I was watching your couple of videos, so you also mentioned that you have been consistent with the podcast without having the thought of that whether a lot of people are watching it or not. So how did you change your mindset from I'm gonna make it happen until unless it gets bigger? You made it.
Yeah.
You had that mindset. How do one overcome that self doubt?
Yeah. Because so first of all, like to go back to the self-awareness thing, like I knew that I wanted it. So regardless of what it took, I was willing to put in the work to make it happen because I knew that I wanted the result that bad. So if assuming that that's taken care of and you're in the game and you're getting frustrated because you're putting in the work and you're not seeing the results, You have to, at some point, trust the process. It's part of the game. It's not a matter of if that's going to happen, it's a matter of when that's going to happen. And the difference between people who are successful and people who are not successful is the people who are not successful feel that pain when they're not getting the results, but they're putting in the work and then they stop. And that's like, it's a difficult time, man. It's a very difficult time to feel like you're doing all of the things that you should be doing. And you're putting in the work because only you know. Nobody else is going to know. You can fake it on social media all day long. The only person that's going to know if you're putting in the work is you.
Right.
But when you know that you're putting in the work and you're not getting the results, it becomes really, really difficult to maintain putting in the work constantly all the time. But understand that you are absolutely not alone. Not only are you not alone, like this is the price of admission. Anybody that's successful has gone through a period of time where they were putting in the work and not seeing the results. It's the most painful part. I call it the callus building phase. Because when I started learning to play the guitar a long time ago, and I don't really play much anymore, to be honest, but I used to play a good amount. And when I first started learning how to play the guitar, I legitimately had a thought in my head, an intrusive thought in my head that was like, you are not meant to play the guitar. This is too hard. It's too difficult. Like I would learn an acoustic guitar, not an electric guitar. So when you put your fingers on the strings, it's really difficult to push down all the strings. Like the strings cut into your fingers, especially like your pinky and your ring finger, because they're doing like, for the most part, they're most of the time holding down on the fret. They're holding down the smallest strings on the steel string guitar, and those small strings like dig into your pinky and your ring finger, and it's impossible for you to make a chord sound good because it's not, the string isn't physically being pushed on the fret hard enough to make a good sound, and you get this buzzing and you can't even play one chord. You're like, I have the formation, I'm trying to strum, it doesn't sound good at all. And like I try to switch chords, forget about that. I don't even remember how to make the second chord formation. You're doing all this stuff, you're trying to play, it's buzzing, it sounds terrible, nothing about it is fun. But then what happens after you do it every day for a couple of months is your fingers start getting these little calluses on them, on the tips of your fingers. And when those calluses harden, then what happens is you can push those strings down much easier, like physically much easier, because it's hard skin instead of like imprintable soft skin. So you're pressing those strings down. Now all of a sudden the chord sounds good. And then you practice those 3 chords in a chord progression, and you can actually play them in a row and you can switch, and it actually starts sounding good. It's just that during that callus building phase, all you're doing is having pain and listening to shitty music. Like that's all you're doing during that time period. And it sucks and it's not fun. Most people will not stomach that pain. Most people will quit before the calluses are formed. And I'm not talking about guitar anymore. I'm talking about whatever the skill is, whatever the goal is, whether it's getting in shape, building a good business, becoming rich, whatever it is. Like people will not go through the callus building phase because a lot of times it's a lot more than just a month or two. Sometimes it might be a year or two, or maybe even a half a decade or a full decade of just putting in constant work. But the bottom line is most people underestimate what they can do in 10 years and overestimate what they can do in 1 year. And that's why I go all the way back to the beginning of this conversation when I said it starts with a commitment. Because if you're fully committed, there's no way you're not going to be successful. It's just that most people aren't fully committed. They're only committed if they see a result in a certain period of time. And if they don't see a result in that period of time, then they're like, you know what, I'm just going to go back to my 9 to 5, which is fine for them. If that's what you want to do that. I'm not here to disparage anybody for what they want to do. But if you want to be rich, you want outsized results, you want to do something different and extraordinary with your life, there will be pain. And that's absolutely guaranteed. And the only way to get past it is to commit from the beginning that you're always going to push past the pain because you know the end result's going to be worth it.
That makes a lot of sense. As you mentioned a particular word over here, like that phase of becoming, getting into that shape, that's really hard, and people stuck at that point, they judge themselves that it is not for them and they quit, right? So that's where the self-doubt that happens, and people fail to cope with that, right? So
Yeah.
taking one more topic from that, you mentioned that your future and your success depends on the kind of environment that you have and the kind of network that you have, right? So I really would love to ask this question over here, like how much do we need to think that we have to build, how many numbers of the network that and that I become successful.
Say that again. I'm not sure I understand the question.
It's just that, like, let's say people say that it depends on your environment and the kind of network that you have built. So is this is this something like there is a number involved that I need to build this amount of network that will depict that I would be successful?
No. There's not a number. Um, because everybody that you add to your like quote unquote add to your network is not going to be somebody that you resonate with. You're not supposed to get along and be besties with everybody. That's not how it works. Like we're all wired differently. We have different backgrounds, different contexts, different culture, different perspective, different interests, different wants, needs, desires. Like we all have different things about us. And like if somebody's best friends with everybody, they have a misunderstanding of who they are. Because it's
Right,
impossible to be best friends with everybody.
right,
You're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to have deep relationships with a few people. So my thing is like, I want to be amicable and kind to everybody, regardless of all the other things I just mentioned. But the more people you meet, the more you start to understand yourself, the more you start to see people who you have more commonalities with, and those people are going to be the people that you kind of more like rock with, you know. So it's not a science to a number of people that you need to know or shake hands with or meet or kind of conversations with. It's just as many as you can, you know,
right.
as many as you can until you build the life that you want.
All right. So now we are shifting from the question of about entrepreneurship to like building the podcast, building the business around the podcast. Like when it comes to the podcast, you are considered one of the experts and the mastermind about the podcast. So now, what are the ways that one can build the business around the podcast?
Yeah, dude, it really, again, kind of comes back to self-awareness and what your goals are. Um, for me, when I started my show, I had no idea what it was going to become. I wanted it to just be a podcast. Because when I first started in the podcasting industry, I saw people were making money off of sponsors, and I was like, oh, that's what I'll do. Come to find out, it's really difficult to get good enough numbers to go get sponsors for your show, and I didn't want to wait in order to stop doing what I was doing. I was doing door-to-door sales at the time, and I wanted to be done with door-to-door. That's why I started the podcast. When I started the podcast and I didn't get enough listeners and I couldn't get sponsors, it was like, okay, well, I can either wait 3 years while I'm building up my audience to go get sponsors and continue doing door-to-door for that long, or I can figure out another way to monetize this thing and start making money online so that I can focus my full effort into this podcasting business. And so that's the route that I went. So I started doing more like picked a niche, and I chose like networking and building professional relationships. And I started just doing more like teaching around that, creating masterminds and coaching around creating content and how to like meet more people through your podcast and all those types of things. And then that allowed me to basically step away from doing door to door full time and be like in this business and in the podcast and creation space full time. And then that led to doing podcast coaching and courses, and then that led to starting a software company, getting funding for it, and then that led to building a marketing agency on the back end of the software company, and then that led to getting back into the coaching space, and now we're creating a new membership with a partner of mine, and then I'm building a studio space with a partner of mine. So each piece of it came from the podcast, but probably still the thing that I make the least amount of money on is sponsorship revenue. We just don't make that much on that. Like we might do 6 figures this year on sponsorship revenue, maybe if I get lucky. So and to say, and by the way, like I'm not complaining about that. If I could have done that year one, I'd be stoked out of my mind. That's just not how it worked out for me. Like to me, the blueprint is like start the podcast in a niche, make money doing something else on the back end of the podcast, and then take a percentage of every dollar that you make on that product or service or business or whatever it is you build off the back end. Take a percentage of every dollar you make from that and invest it into advertising your podcast. and getting it in front of more people and more eyeballs and getting more attention. That's like the long game. And that's what it's going to compound attention over time.
All right, right. I understood this point. And is there something like because I heard it somewhere, like maybe I read it on the internet as well. Like, let's say you have your guests around you, and maybe you do some JVs with them later in coming in the future in the some time. So, what is your point of view on this particular point?
What is my what? Sorry.
What is your point of view on this? Like doing a JV, like joint venture with your
Yeah.
guests that you have already interviewed.
Yeah, it's a great thing. I like my big thing is this. The podcast is a connection tool and a relationship builder. The more you do that, the more business you're going to get. However, once you turn your podcast into like a lead gen source, it starts getting really gross to people. Like if you are just going in and hard pitching everybody that comes on your podcast, that's when people are like, okay, well, you brought me on here because I thought that we're gonna just having a podcast conversation, and now you're just pitching me your products or your services, or you're pitching me on leveraging my audience to sell your stuff for you. It's like I don't really even know you still. Like this feels weird and spammy. So I don't recommend that. But I do recommend using your podcast as a really great biz dev tool. And that's what we've helped a lot of businesses do. It's just like, look, especially if you're in a high ticket, high trust business, what you need is fewer prospects with deeper trust with those prospects.
Right.
You don't need a windfall of new prospects. You need, like if you're a wealth manager, you don't need 1,000 leads because 900 of them are going to be unqualified to work with you. You know what I mean? But if you get 10 leads and you have an hour conversation with them, they come to really like you, and then they move $2 million of their assets over to your wealth management firm. Like, yeah, that was probably worth your time to have a podcast. You know what I mean? So I'm a big fan of using podcasts for business development. But yeah, just don't just be careful to not cross the line into being way too salesy, because that to me is detrimental. Like it strips away the reason to do the show to begin with, which is to build the relationship. And when you start spamming people, there's no relationship. It's just their prospects. And like that game doesn't work in podcasting because you would theoretically have to interview like 150 people a month if you're really going to just like go through, treat it like a numbers game and prospect like that. You have to interview so many people that like it would have to be your main lead gen activity, and it would be only for lead gen. And to me, you want to be way more straightforward about it when you're inviting people to come on the show. Like you don't want to give that feeling of like pulling the rug out from under somebody when they feel like you brought them on because you actually like them and respect them and want their expertise. And then it becomes very clear, like halfway through the interview, that, oh, you only brought me on because you want to sell me something. Like, actually, you know what? I think I got to go do anything else right now. You know what I mean? So I just be careful with that kind of stuff. But other than that, I'm a huge fan of using podcasts for biz dev for sure.
Right, right. So I understand this point. Like, you cannot pitch everyone who comes on this show, right? So it's like the only one purpose was to ask this question is like, how do we sustain that relationship with the guests that we are, let's say, we are over here, like we are meeting for the very first time, right? So it's like I had people who had asked me the question like, how do we sustain that relationship with the guests that we already have that maybe that can help us to grow in
Yeah.
future?
Yeah, try to find ways to stay in touch. What I do is I put on a dinner like once or twice a year, and I invite out all my past guests as well as like investors in my company, clients, key relationships, and stuff like that. I put them all in a room together, and allows me to just kind of stay in front of people, stay top of mind. Even if they say no to coming to the dinner, they appreciate the invite because all the expenses are on me. So I pay for the dinner, I pay for everything. So it's like, oh, I can't make it this time, but I really appreciate the invite. Great to hear from you. How are you doing? It gives me an excuse to like reach back out to a bunch of people and establish that connection a little bit further. And then yeah, like find ways to try to stay in touch that are just completely value added ways. Like, oh, I read this article, thought of you, hope you're doing well. Don't ask for anything. Don't like, just find ways to stay in touch with those people and do follow-ups like that, because it's going to benefit you in the long run.
Right.
Whether it's, I know some people that try to do like Zoom calls with past guests to try to add value. Some people do, like I do those dinners. Some people just do emails or write thank you cards or something like that. There's a lot of different ways to do it, but try to stay in touch with them as much as you can because they're real relationships. You want to treat them like that.
Right, right. So thank you so much for bringing this up, like sharing with people, with the audience over here, that how they can sustain their relationship with the guests that they have brought over there on the show, and not even to pitch them, but to try maintaining that relationship by adding value to them. Right. So moving forward to the some some other questions over here. It's like you have your amazing network. So I really would love to ask over here, like what was, like, if you can share with the people around over here, uh, what you would say that what you think that you have learned that from people like Dan Love, Grant Cardone, Chris Voss, Tom Bible, like people like this.
What have I done to interview them?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean consistency over a long period of time, lots of follow up, cold pitches. I mean, like it's a lot less secret sauce than you think or hope it is potentially. It's just been a lot of time. At the beginning, I just tried to build relationships with a couple of strategic people, and really go deep with those relationships. People that I felt like I would resonate with if I knew them personally. Then I would pay money to go to a mastermind or get coaching from them or something like that. Try to build a deeper relationship with them. Try to add value to them. Typically when I did stuff like that, it was typically with somebody that was a well-connected individual, so that even if they weren't willing to make an introduction, I would still be able to leverage their name when I was reaching out to other people. So I'd do stuff like that. I would try to stay industry specific for a little while. So like if I was trying to get podcasters, it was like I'm getting podcasters right now because it's easier to go get somebody else when that person already knows the person that you just had. So if you have a list of 50 people you're trying to get on your show, and 10 of them are in different industries, you know what I mean? Like it's just going to be difficult. Like you're starting over every time when you switch to an industry because they don't know who that person is. It's like, well, I've gotten 6 of the world's top business podcasters, but then you go over to the real estate space or whatever, and they have no idea who those people are. Well, you're starting over with credibility again. There's no reason why this person should say yes to you at this point. So like I'll just knock out people all in a certain niche, and then I'd find like a bridge, like a connection point to be like, okay, Grant Cardone. Well, Grant Cardone is a famous business person, but he's also famous in the real estate investor world. So now I can go over to this world and start getting all these real estate investors because they may not know these 7 other famous podcasters that I had, because they all know each other and hang out in this world, but they do know Grant, who hangs out in this world and he hangs out in this world. So I like find this little bridge, and then I'm able to go attack this whole other like sector of people to start bringing on the show. But it's much easier to get other people on when you already had recognizable people on. Those first few are difficult. It's just a matter of cold pitches, emails, persistence, follow up. And somebody's going to say yes eventually. And once you get the first yes, it's easier to get the second yes. And once you get the second yes, it's easier to get the third. It's easier to get the fifth. It's easier to get the 12th and the 18th and the 25th and so on. It's just a matter of like staying consistent, and keeping in the game.
All right, all right. Do we have like last question? Like, do we have the time to take the last question over here?
Let's do it. One more.
Okay, so moving forward over here, what are the 3 advices you would like to give to the people who are there into entrepreneurship journey, and you think that you have committed that mistake, one should not avoid that?
The 3 what?
3 mistakes that you think that you have committed in your entrepreneurship journey, and one should not avoid that who are into the entrepreneurship.
First off, being impatient. Like everything. If you're an entrepreneurial personality like I am, you tend to be this way anyway. But to the degree where you become discouraged is not good. So like I would be impatient, meaning like I had no idea how to build a business. I'm like, I'm going to build $1 million business in 6 months. And it's like, well, like you don't even know what your product is yet. Like let's simmer down a little bit, understand it's a process, and you put in the work and have big goals and dreams. That's fine. But if you don't reach them, don't start beating yourself up because you didn't pull off the impossible. You know what I'm saying? Like there's, anyway, I could beat a dead horse with that, but being impatient is one. Which also got me in trouble with like scaling too fast. That was actually the second one. because I was a good salesperson. So it was like we started scaling up our agency services and we scaled really quickly. But then I realized that like, oh, yeah, being a CEO and being a salesperson are completely different things. And I didn't know that. Yeah, at the time, I knew it like in my head, but like in practice, it was like I didn't understand what that was going to entail. So when we started scaling, it was like my team literally told me, um, after like 8 or 9 months of this, like running this new offer, which we scaled to past $1 million in 8 months. But then my team was like, "Hey, Travis, stop selling. Like we literally can't handle any more business. We're overwhelmed. We're working our tails off trying to do all of this stuff, but we're behind. We're sinking here. We need some help." You know what I mean? And it was a big lesson for me to be like, oh, like more revenue doesn't necessarily mean your problems are going to be solved. More revenue just means you have different problems to solve. And for me, it meant I had different problems to solve that I had zero experience or know-how in terms of solving. So now I had to go back and be like, oh, now well, I got to learn all these other stuff that I didn't know I had to learn, or you got to hire somebody who knows that stuff. Either way, both of those things were things that I had never done before. Either doing the role myself or hiring for that role were things I'd never done. So it was still going to be difficult, either way. So impatience, scaling too fast. I would say, lastly, buying into the lie that you can do it all on your own. If you want to build anything meaningful, anything of significance, anything past $1 million, really, you're going to need talent, like good talent. And if you're only ever hiring like freelancers and VAs to take off like, minutia level tasks from your plate, you're just never going to scale like a meaningful and real business that's actually has enterprise value that somebody else is going to buy from you. And again, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Like there's no shame at all in running a profitable $1 million a year business that spits out $250,000 to 300,000 a year in profit without taking too much of your time anymore. Like there's no shame in that at all. I'm just saying, like, if your goal is to be like, oh, I want to be rich, I want to make millions of dollars and build an 8-9 figure business, it's like I'm in the middle of trying to learn how to do that myself. So I can't necessarily give the advice, but what I did learn was that like there's no way there, like it's impossible for me to do everything myself. Not only is it impossible, but like it's like, or not only is it frowned upon, but it's impossible. Like I can't be the expert salesperson. I can't be the expert ops person. I can't be the expert systems person. I can't be the expert software developer. I can't be like, it's physically impossible for me to be good at all those things. So the only logical way to be able to scale a business through doing that is to hire talent who's really good at all of those things and then do the thing that you are uniquely qualified to do. And so that was a big lesson that I had to learn last year after a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, was that if you really want to like build something meaningful, something that people are going to buy, you have to replace yourself with talent, and talent that doesn't just like take tasks off of your plate, but talent that actually knows more than you about the thing that you're hiring them to do.
Right. Right. So that's something what is just mind blowing, right? Understanding that what you actually capable of, and rest let the best talent to do get the work done, right? So thank you so
Yes,
much,
sir.
Travis, for being an amazing guest over here and answering the questions of the audience, even that I've brought up over here and asked you. Thank you for answering them, and thank you to the audience as well for coming over and again and listening to us. I would drop his website link over here in the description so that you can jump into checking out with his website and you can get in touch with him. Can you speak up your website link over here? Although I'm going to mention it over here in the description.
Perfect. Yeah, it's just travischappell.com, CHAPPELL, travischappell.com. You head over there, find out everything you need to know.
Perfect, perfect. So thank you so much once again, everyone.